Welcome everybody. My name is Jeff Burstein. I am the Chief Student Advocate at L-EAF.org, and we welcome you to our Leaders Retreat, a leadership community of practice where we bring educational leaders together to hear about some common practices, some new approaches, things that are being tried around at different schools that they may or may not be aware of, and a place to get together with your peers and talk about some of your challenges and so on. And today we have a special guest presenter, Simon Holzapfel from the L-EAF Lab, which is a student lab where students get together in teams and are able to learn agile ways of working while actually getting real world experience by solving real world problems. Simon, whenever you're ready, we'd be happy to go ahead and turn it over to you. You can introduce your topic and then we'll go ahead and get started.
Sounds great. Thanks, Jeff. Hey, everyone. I'm going to be talking today about change and specifically about specific ways of listening to support change. Let me get my screen share going here. So my assumption is if you're watching this, you're someone who is in education and you're interested in finding ways for yourself or for others that you care about learning how to do better listening in supporting your organization in creating some sort of positive change. This deck is really about how do we learn how to listen. And in this deck, the word client could just be, someone who is talking to you about some change that they're looking to make, or there is some sort of issue that's present. So what we're going to do here is say, okay, the scenario is there is someone in your professional life who wants to make some sort of change. There is some sort of situation that for them has gotten to the point that they're talking to you because they've got an issue, they've got a problem. And what you want to do is to be able to do this, what's called reflective listening, to really help them figure out where it is that they want to go and to really surface that issue so that you can help them effectively create that change. A side note about how change works. When someone wants to make a change in their life, you have to consider that there are several layers of things going on for them. There are going to be some functional things that they want to change. There's going to be some emotional stuff tied up with that change. And then there's going to be some social implications of that. And if you've ever dealt with a sort of emotionally charged situation, you also know that very often, and I would include myself and everyone I've ever met in this, when we want change, it's also true that we might know sort of the surface of what we want, but we may not have thought through the whole thing. And so this way of listening, reflective listening, helps us to get a more complete picture of the change that the person who we're talking to is interested in. Change represents fundamentally a dilemma. And it's a dilemma because we are always of at least one mind about that particular change. I had the great pleasure of getting mentored by a guy named Bob Mesta. Bob Mesta is an innovator, and he is specifically the guy who invented the little triangular the little triangular icon in your car that shows you which side of your car the fuel port is on. Bob has about 1,000 of those sort of contributions he's made to humankind, and he has developed this four forces diagram. So when you're talking to somebody and they've got some concern, they've got something that they're wanting to talk about, the dilemma that they face is comprised of at least four of these things, or four of these things in different proportions. One is they're being drawn forward, they're being pulled to some new concept, new behavior by the magnetism of some better thing. Sometimes this is just a bright, shiny object. All of us, have different kinds of bright, shiny objects. For some of us, it might be a food, it might be a diet, it might be an exercise regime, it might be a thing that we want to learn. But there's this magnetism that's motivating our action forward. Similarly, it might be that we're being pushed away from where we are just because the current situation is untenable. And so we're looking for a problem because we have some lit match between our toes and we just need to make it better. So those are the two forces that propel us towards change or that propel someone towards change. And so if you're meeting with somebody, often you'll notice that there's some proportion of I've got to get away from where I am or I want to get somewhere else. And those are two different forces as this model talks about. Now, if you've ever worked in an organization, you might hear someone talk about, well, we can't change because that's just the way we do things around here. That would be the habit of the present or the tug of historical allegiances. That's the bottom left arrow that tends to block change in an organization or within a single person. Similarly, there can be anxiety about the new solution, uncertainty surrounding that new choice. So, as an example, I'm coaching someone now who is working on developing a greater sense of confidence in her role as a leader. Part of her anxiety about moving towards that stronger position is she herself needs to think about herself differently, and she's worried about how will people treat me if I start to act differently. So there's often anxiety there. So this really is a dilemma. Every change on earth involves some sort of dilemma because we're of two minds about it, and that's just normal. I use this image to show sort of the ambiguity of change. And what we're trying to do here with reflective listening is learn how to surface needs, recognizing that, like an iceberg, some of those needs are known and clear both to the person who wants to change and to the person that they're talking to who's trying to help them, but recognizing that there's a lot underneath there. So I'll use these are often called iceberg conversations where someone's got something that they're worked up about. And my job is to help them surface more of the iceberg because there's that ambiguity around change. The model that I've been experimenting with over the last several months is this here, and this is called what's called motivational interviewing. And I'm not going to talk too much about it. We're really just going to focus on the bottom of these four planks. So motivational interviewing is a specific protocol developed over about the last 30 years. It's highly documented in scientific papers. So this is not just like a whiz bang thing. This is extremely well validated empirically across thousands and thousands and thousands of people who are trying to create change. And so there are four things that a helping listener can do. We're talking really mostly about engaging with that person to sustain change. In future sessions, I can talk about how do we, as coaches and leaders, focus the direction of change, evoke that change, and help people speak the change they want to see into existence, and then do the actual planning of that change. But over time, we have to start with where they are. And I want to specifically explain what OARS is. OARS is just an easy way of remembering what are the four things that I need to do as a listener, as someone who's trying to guide change and support that change. So OARS stands for open-ended, and this is about asking open-ended questions to that person so we can help them surface all the parts of that iceberg. A is affirmation. An affirmation is not simply agreeing with the person. In fact, agreeing with them is not what is required to help them change. Affirmation is just signaling, usually through nonverbal communication, that you are with them, you're hearing them, that you understand what they're saying. Reflection, this is the thing we're talking about today, which is reflective listening. That's the R in OARS. And then S is summarizing. So that's what the OARS is, and we're going to talk about get specifically into how exactly does this all work. The first thing that we want to understand is what is it that currently prevents us from being effective, helpful listeners? And this was interesting to me because I realized very quickly that I was not nearly as skillful a listener as I thought I was. In the last couple of months, as I've learned this way of listening and helping people change, I've been surprised by how many people commit some of these roadblocks to effective listening. Now, what the roadblocks do is they limit the person that you're talking to, their ability to surface more of that iceberg and verbally explore it. Ultimately, these behaviors are more self-centered than client-centered. They're more centered on the person asking questions, the helper, than the person being helped. And so the problem here, and if you've been to a doctor recently or talked to anyone in a helping profession, often when they do these things, it creates this sort of one-up relationship where they're the person who is the expert, they're the ones who knows everything, and you're kind of one down to them. That works against a truly collaborative conversation about change. So some of these things are pretty intuitive, like the first one, ordering, directing, commanding. We all know that those are things not to do when you want to help someone have this discovery conversation. Similarly, warning, threatening, those are not helpful. And the third one, this is where people often run afoul of their own best intentions and they do these things. Similarly, people get drawn into persuading, arguing, lecturing, or moralizing. They obviously try not to get into disagreeing, criticizing, judging, and blaming. And then the next line was the one that really struck me. And I realized I had been committing sort of not good listening, not skillful change supporting by agreeing, approving, and praising. So those are the ones that for people who want to think of themselves as helpful listeners often make this mistake. Shaming, ridiculing, labeling, we know that in change conversations, this doesn't help. Interpreting and analyzing, this was also something that sometimes as we're trying to listen, we get wrong. Similarly, we often do reassuring and consoling. That's not helpful. And even questioning and probing, those can also be problematic behaviors that don't help the person in front of us get further with where they're trying to go and understanding um, the situation and how to make it better. And so I'm just going to give you an example of this, show you how easy it is in this script to commit a whole bunch of listening fouls. So imagine that RM here stands for relationship manager. So this could be, a doctor or a nurse. This could be a therapist. This could be just a manager. And so the client or the person who has this iceberg situation that they want to resolve is saying, I don't know whether to leave him out of my will or not. And then what not to say is, you should do whatever you think is best. Why? Because that's number 5. Um, the client might say, but that's the point. I don't know what is best. And again, remember, in change conversations, we all have this ambivalence. We have this ambiguity. We have this dilemma. Do what's in your heart. That's not helpful. Well, I just feel angry and trapped by how he's acting. Have you thought about not talking to him for a while and feeling it out? That's again not, this is just putting up roadblock after roadblock to this person doing that exploration. I don't want to get into this too much just in the interest of time, but you can see quickly that just standard language around trying to help someone change can be littered with these roadblocks to their understanding. Again, there's an iceberg moment, and you're trying to help this person through this iceberg moment of getting that iceberg to change direction or to change dimension or change something about it. One of the things that we often don't think about is what are the actual mechanics of change? This is a just simple model for the process of communication. Keep in mind, when this person is coming to you, they have some meaning that they want to communicate, and language is our best tool for doing that, and language is highly imperfect, as I'll illustrate in a second. So if you start from the bottom left of this cycle, the speaker has some meaning that they want to communicate. There's some feeling, there's some event, there's something, and they have to then encode that meaning or that sentiment. And they encode it by choosing words that they will then say. What is required then is a listener to do the hearing and to actually accurately hear those words. As we hear them, we then have to perform a step, which is decoding. And the decoding is where we then take what we've heard and try to turn it into some sort of coherent meaning that we think the speaker meant. So that is what the listener thinks the heard words mean. And then what you do, and this is the hard move to change, is you offer a reflection about what that meaning is. And we'll talk about how that can be a challenge. So here's an example of how language can be imperfect and sometimes confusing. So take what sounds like a simple utterance, I wish I were more social, and consider that there could be lots of different meanings in this sort of iceberg. So this person might be trying to express, I feel lonely and I want to have more friends. Notice how that's different from another possible meaning, I get nervous when I have to meet new people. Consider how that is different from, I should spend more time getting to know people, a different meaning still. Or a further different meaning, I would like to be more popular. Or finally, people don't invite me to their parties. These are five different meanings that these words, I wish I'm more social, could all be pointing to. As a listener, reflective listening allows you to sort of work with the person you're talking to untangle that and zero in on which of those, in this case, five different possible meanings might be there. And so the critical move as that helping listener who wants to facilitate change for a person or a team or an organization, you have to accept the challenge of doing what's called reflective listening. And this is where you have to go out of your comfort zone and make an informed guess about the meaning that the person is trying to communicate. And here's what reflecting can sound like. And I'm just going to read this. And what you notice is this person will, to go back to that OR's description, they're gonna ask an open-ended question, but then they're not going to probe. They're not going to do all of those roadblocks, and they're going to make these reflective statements that are guesses at what this person means. So this is in a medical context. The interviewer says, "How have you been feeling lately since your surgery?" It was quite an ordeal. I can tell you, I'm lucky to be here. You could easily have died. Client, they said there was a 90% blockage, and at my age, that kind of surgery is major, but I made it through. And you're glad. Yes, I have plenty to live for. Interviewer, I know your family is important to you. Client, I love seeing the grandkids, two boys, two girls, right here in town. I like doing things with them. You really love them. And so on. So you see here, this person is not asking question after question after question. When you ask someone a question, it actually removes them from narrating their experience. When you make these small inferences about what the person means and you offer them as statements, reflective statements, you're then keeping them in the flow of that exploration and allowing them to clarify their own meaning to themselves and to you. So this is an example of how a skillful listener actually asks way fewer questions than you might think and is much more interested in offering these short reflective guesses at what is going on for this person. So here are a handful of skillful practice points to keep in mind. So notice how in that last section, the interviewer is using the word you a lot. So you blah blah blah. And so you're often starting your statements with you and making that guess. And what you're doing is you can think about it as you're helping them get their story out. So you're basically kind of continuing the paragraph of their meaning in whatever you said, branching off of and reflecting their last statement. What you want to not do is simply repeat their words back to them. That gets really annoying really quickly because you seem like you don't know, you out yourself as someone who is sort of not skillful in doing that. If you've ever been on the receiving end of what I'm hearing is blah, 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 it becomes annoying. And again, it kind of removes you from trying to clarify what you actually mean. The next point is really important, which is trusting that the person you're talking to is in fact an expert on themselves and their situation. Avoid that tendency to think I'm the expert, I know more, whatever it is, because then you're not a peer to them and you're not really helping them, as a true collaborator, but in some other mode. And try not to understand what they mean in the moment. You're discovering it with them. You want to go with their conversation flow, and again, you're sort of reflecting back to them what they're trying to surface for you. You want to minimize the number of questions and try to use one reflection at least per statement. And what you want to try to do in that guessing, in that reflective guess, is slightly overshoot their literal words, but just by a little bit. Because when you get that right, and this is magical. I mean, I've had conversations with my teenagers recently that have been extraordinarily different from other conversations because I've been practicing this. And it's just incredible because they keep talking. And lots of parents of teenagers regret, or kids in their 20s regret that their kids don't talk to them. A lot of it I'm now coming to see is just parents aren't trained in reflective listening. And are actually, most humans I've met are actually not that skilled in reflective listening. In any event, what you want to do is overshoot what they mean with that guess so they can respond with new, clarifying, additional information. Stop putting up the roadblocks so the information can really flow. All right. And so here's literally the mechanics of it. In your head, you want to be asking, do you mean that have a lot to live for? Or do you mean that you really want to talk to your boss and tell them that they're stressing you out? Instead of that, leave off the do you mean that you and just say you. You want your boss to better support you. You want your boss to blah, blah, blah. You want your teacher to blah, blah, blah. You want your brother to blah, blah, blah. And you just start with you. And that's how you, at the most basic level, can begin to implement reflective listening. It will be awkward. It took weeks for me to not feel super awkward, and I still feel medium awkward with it, but I'm still in early along in my journey with this. But what you'll notice is when you get it right, this magical thing happens, which is the person keeps talking and sharing relevant information, making it much, much easier to understand the dimensions of change, the details of change that that person is after. So that's the very kind of specific guidance of how do I do reflective listening? You just, instead of saying, do you mean that? You just say you with that inference. The last major piece of content here is to understand there are two different kinds of reflections, simple and complex. Simple reflections are kind of the most literal way of reflecting what someone has just said. Complex is about getting to those deeper meanings that the person may or may not themselves even fully appreciate yet. So if you're trying reflective listening and you're keeping it really simple, just kind of reflecting back, like if you're talking to a teacher and the teacher's like, I'm just so stressed out because I can't, see my kids, and you say you're stressed out, that might be just annoying to them because it's too literally reflecting what they just said. You might try instead, you're not able to spend the time with your kids that you want. That would be more of a guessing statement. And that might be really what they're after. But if you're sticking too close to their words, you might feel like you're spinning your wheels, not getting anywhere. Complex reactions, and this is where it's, I think, going to be a while before AI can get really good at this, because you have to have so many levels of inference and social skill to do this well. Complex reflections add some meaning, some emphasis, and it's a little bit guessing about the unspoken content that they want to surface that they themselves may or may not be aware of. So what you're trying to do is move past what they said literally without jumping too far ahead or getting into that danger of offering conclusions. So this is kind of the last thing. In this way of overshooting versus undershooting, I just want to illustrate this. And what you're trying to do is overshoot their literal words, but not by too much. So you want to undershoot a little bit, but not, again, this is a delicate balance that you're trying to strike. So an overshooting might sound like the person in front of you might say, I just don't like the way she comments on how I raise my children. And then you say, you're really furious with your mother-in-law. And the client says, well, no, not that angry, really. She's family after all. That would be, you've gone too far. They correct you and clarify, but you don't kind of keep flowing forward. Notice how in the second instance where you undershoot it by a little bit, I just don't like the way she comments on how I raise my children. And you say, you're a bit annoyed with your mother-in-law. And then they confirm, I'll say, it irritates me how she feels like she needs to correct everyone. And then you can imagine coming back with, those corrections are blah, blah, blah to you, where you're again offering that next guess about it. And you're sort of following along with them, guiding and reflecting so they can keep saying and sharing information that lets you help them create the change that they are looking for. All right. the closing thoughts. The power of open-ended questions is massive. If that to you is something that is new, start there, and just avoid yes or no questions whenever possible. Don't worry about trying to be perfect with your guesses because you're going to guess wrong a bunch, right? You're trying to get to the part of the iceberg that is underwater. So you're going to be in the vicinity, you're going to be in rapport with them, but you're going to have to be guessing, and that is okay. With those bigger chunks of text, if you can get two reflections out, the person will feel incredibly heard. And it's this amazing thing. I'm thinking back to a skillful therapist, for example, that I worked with a couple of years ago, and she had this incredible ability to do this. Similarly, if you want to go back and watch the Sopranos, watch early Sopranos with Dr. Malfi, because her ability to do exactly this sort of listening is exceptional. In fact, it's so good that the American Psychiatric Association recommended watching The Sopranos to see how to do this specific kind of listening. As you think back on your change helping conversations, you want to shoot for at least half of your statements being reflections in this sort of change supporting way. And you want to raise the complexity, the depth of those reflections if you're not making progress. Finally, and I can't emphasize this enough, trusting that the person you're talking to truly wants the best for themselves, that they're enough of an expert on their situation and themselves to have those major insights before you need to add your expertise or guidance. You're really here to help surface the iceberg. And when you can do that to somebody, you'll notice it right away, because as you hit those points of true, getting it right, the information flow will just be incredible. And you'll quickly find that you're able to zero in on those change interests that they have faster, more fluidly. And it's a joy to behold. And I would just encourage people to step out of their comfort zone and try some of these ways of listening. Yeah, Andy, I think you had a hand up. Oh, is that clapping?
It's both. Very, very wonderful and inspiring, and well done.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for that, Simon. And it really does play to adaptive leaders and how they can help support their staff as their staff is working through whatever challenges they're struggling with, without crossing over into that domain of micromanagement or bossiness. And so really do appreciate you sharing this with us. Does anybody have any questions for Simon?
Yeah, there was a question in the chat. I think Heather wanted to know sort of what's the source material here. So the book I would recommend starting with is by Miller and Rolnick, Rollnick and Miller. And it's the third edition of the book entitled Motivational Interviewing. It is really a very sort of granular, step-by-step, methodical walk through both the literature, and this is really important because so often in the world of change management, a lot of it just like, airy-fairy sort of self-help stuff that might be well intended, but personally just is often just crap, because it's just like it's woo-woo and it's not empirical and it's not, grounded in a scientific literature. And it's just funny because like I thought I was a good listener, and I just realized just in so many ways across decades of, not being a bad listener, that I just had so much headroom to grow in my listening ability. And once I got over the hump of just offering those reflections, just like trying to do it once in a conversation or trying to do it twice in a conversation, it was this, you can just feel how that person like relaxes, connects. If you want to truly get to a collaborative environment, feeling heard is the name of the game. Reflective listening, that is the thing that gets you to that point of being able to really build that rapport, that trust, and then collaborate, with your teammates or whomever you're trying to solve those problems and create that positive change with.
All right, Andy, you have your hand up again.
Yeah, we'll get in a queue. Don, maybe next. I'm curious, Simon, so if you're in an existing client coaching relationship and you want to introduce this methodology,
Yep.
at least two paths come to mind. Just F and do it and see what happens. Or be explicit about it and say, in the past, blah, 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 I'm going to try something new. Let's go. And then close with, was this new helpful?
So
What have you, if it's a brand new relationship, it becomes part of the coaching agreement. This
yep.
is how I'm going to do it. But if it's existing and you're tweaking things, do you have advice on how to present?
Yeah. So what I have done is exactly that latter case that you just summarized, which is, hey, I'm going to start, in our next session, I'm going to do these things, and not getting into the gnarly details, but just like, I'm just going to do some stuff a little bit differently. If it's annoying or if it works out, I'm going to ask you about it. So just like you said, because to me, as an ethical matter, I want to flag for them that I'm doing something differently, rather than kind of try to be sneaky about it. Because to me, that just feels untrusting. But I could also see, in an extreme situation where there isn't time, you wouldn't do that. But under normal sort of executive coaching, change coaching stuff, I'm always a fan of doing that little metacognitive step back, because what that enables me to do, just like you said, is then come back and be like, hey, how'd that feel? Because then you're, again, building that rapport and that trust with the person that you're working with, and you sort of further cement the connection. Yeah, Don?
You're on mute, Don. Don, you're muted.
Don, you're still on mute.
All right. This is great. Thanks, Simon,
Sure.
for the presentation, and thanks, Jeff, for setting this up. I've got a confession and then a question. This presentation prompts me to remember all the way back to the second headship, where I sat with a faculty member who came into my office and started to vent, and I started to immediately go to problem-solving mode. And she took that for about 2 sentences and said, "Stop doing that. Just listen." And I was so shocked by it, because I thought I was a decent listener. I was so shocked by it that I just listened, and I can't remember doing any of the reflective listening. I just yeah, tried to be all ears. So that was a while back. I'd like to think that I've made some advances, but here's my question. Yeah, Simon,
Yep.
in your work in this arena, and in your reading, have you found or sensed any gender-connected ways of interacting? And I'm thinking particularly of male models of leadership
Mm,
that train and encourage
sure.
and channel male leaders into problem solving and not doing reflective listening, that is different in the dynamic with female leaders.
Sure. I mean, I would hazard a guess that men are intuitively worse at this, because they think they need to be experts. They think they need to be the provider of
Yeah.
whatever. So, um, yeah, I mean, uh, I think as a practitioner, no, everyone, this is equally available to anyone to get skillful at. But as a man, stepping away from those preconceptions about what it means to be a good listener, we
Yeah.
have further to step on average than women, is my guess.
Yeah. All
And I
right.
think in part that's just women are socialized to listen to each other in
Yeah.
ways that tend to be more in this mode than men, have generally a sort of like maybe a three-color emotional palette at best, whereas I think women are allowed and encouraged to have more emotional, broader palette than that.
So to that point, short follow-up.
Yeah.
Yeah, what comes to my mind is that part of the job of a leader, male or female, is to not only be overt, as you've talked about it, overt about the kind of listening that you're doing,
Hmm.
but to encourage those you're working with to engage in reflective listening as well.
Oh
So
yeah.
not the leader who is in control and doing the thing that your colleagues can't do, but rather part of your leadership is to share an evolving and powerful dynamic. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think now if I could wind the clock back and I think about the years of running professional development in schools, for example, I would start with this. If you want to really change the culture of an entire organization and you teach everyone how to do this reflective listening, faculty can listen to each other and listen to parents and listen to students far more effectively. And that trust that everyone talks about needing, this is how you do it. Building trust doesn't come from doing trust falls in any durable way. It comes from day to day, minute to minute, conversation to conversation. So to me, this is, this struck me as like, this is the DNA of trust and collaboration. So if I was to propose something that is totally non-radical in its foundation, but would get radical results in terms of improvement, this would be it, bar none. Because it's then a way of getting those self-help resources and really pointing the organization back at itself to be supporting itself much more effectively. So teachers could use it in every single set of relationships they have. Same thing, all the way for administrators. So yeah, Heather, I see you got a couple of, please feel free to join in. I'm just trying to see what you've added here. Yeah, right. So men often talk to solve, yeah. And that's, they're just all these things that we're socialized to be ineffective at. Yep. Yeah, that's right. That's another good point about sort of vulnerability. Please go ahead.
I've got lawnmowers going on around here, so that's why I've been muted. But yeah, I mean, Google spent so much money on researching how to build effective teams and what are the interactions in effective teams and what is the key, right? And the key is vulnerability, but vulnerability comes when you feel like you belong and you're heard.
Bingo. Yep. And to feel heard, you need someone who's a skilled listener. And to do that,
exactly,
you need to stop putting up roadblocks. And to do that, you need to know that there are roadblocks.
Yep.
So I mean, this has been for me probably the most important professional development I've done in the last 5 years, because I see the evidence of its absence all over the place, and just a vast amount of BS in organizations that want to talk about community, that want to have all these highfalutin goals, but are not doing the fundamental thing of helping people feel heard, pulling out all the goodness that all the people in the organization already have, just because people keep throwing up inadvertently roadblocks.
And interesting, if you guys are interested in looking at a little bit more about this, is if you go to Dartmouth College, they're doing an entire thing on discourse as a way of addressing social disruption and disagreements. And so they're really pushing hard into exactly this, right? Like, we need to have conversations where we hear both sides. And so many of these are Zoomed. You can catch them, but they're doing things where they've got a professor of Middle Eastern studies and a professor of Judaic studies together talking about the Palestinian-Israeli situation right now, so that you're hearing a conversation that is balanced and allows for sort of more in-depth understanding of what has led to this. It's really been good, but I think that's also reflective of, we're not doing enough reflective listening in any aspect of our culture right now, and here's what we're dealing with, right?
No, well, and in fact, I mean, if we look at so much of our political leadership, this is the exact opposite of what they do. If you just, and again, this is not a partisan statement. You see evidence of this everywhere. Leadership is in this old mode that is just not about building trust and community. And we see it in people trying to shoot other people and just crazy stuff that is just not indicative of civilizational advance, not indicative of this country or any subgroup of the country getting to a better future where people, have that trust. So yeah, and that's cool. I'd love to, I'm going to go check out the Dartmouth stuff just to see, because that's the sort of thing that, for example, within a school, how many schools have a mission of, we value, diversity, or, these sorts of things. And yet too often the actual rubber meets the road either not at all, or in a very sort of fake way that I think people don't see as authentic. And so, we need that sort of stuff. And I'm glad that Dartmouth is doing that.
Yeah. They said our role as an institution is not to come down on one side or the other, but to ensure that we're discussing openly, frankly, and in the context of understanding what's going on, what's happening, why, and then how do you move forward from that, has to come out of that context. So they're doing a very good job of it, I have to say.
Cool. That's great. That's great.
Okay. Does anybody else have any other questions?
I would love to hear, Mary, either from you or from Dr. Ingram, just about, and Heather, similarly, what are you all up to in your organizations? What sort of change things are happening or not happening? And I'm asking you all in particular, just because I know Don and Andy, so I've got some background there. So,
Well, this is Mary. I'm going to leave my camera off because I'm on
Sure,
my phone. So
that's
it'll
fine.
be at a very strange angle.
Okay.
But I am in the IT area. I'm an information technology instructor, and I was an information systems professor in the past.
Hmm.
And I think that as IT people, we really jump to giving advice and solving problems. And it's actually socialized because you start off generally in a support role. And so everyone that's in management, worked helping users initially, just fixing their computers, troubleshooting software, the network. And I don't think we ever, as IT people, question or even think about the emotions. You may vaguely acknowledge it, like, that sounds frustrating, but it's very surface. So I think this is a very new style that I could implement with my students, that I could use with colleagues,
Yeah.
with folks that I'm mentoring, to dig into that emotional side of, just letting somebody express their feelings about the situation before we jump into problem solving, right?
Mhm.
So that they feel heard and that I am understanding what they are trying to convey. So this is really a very useful technique. Um, just allowing someone to speak and then kind of nudging them forward without jumping to conclusions.
Yeah. Cool.
I love it. There's empathy in the support desk, right? That becomes
Yep.
the new KPI instead of, mean time to resolution. There's incentives in your system like, okay, ticket was opened, it was closed. There's no time to engage with the human. You like solve their access problem, but don't discharge their frustration or their feelings of inadequacy. Like I'm stupid. Why can't I do this simple thing? Why can't I log in? There's huge power in working with the humans at the other end with empathy.
So
I
Andy, I
don't
didn't
know how
actually,
you incentivize that.
so I didn't actually use this term, but the technical term that is used in ORS is called accurate empathy. So the reflecting is to check the accuracy that your empathy is actually pointed in the right direction. So yeah, so anyhow, just accurate empathy is the term of art that people who are specialists in this would call this. Dr. Ingerman, I'd love to hear just, kind of what you're up to and if any of this resonates or doesn't, or
Please call me Kathy. I don't
Kathy.
know why it comes up that way. I mean, I
Okay.
am a doctor, but I don't know why it comes up that way. I need to change that. I just came for myself
Hmm.
to, become a better listener. So
Okay.
it's really nothing to do with my role per se. I
Mhm.
am an instructional designer by
Hmm.
trade, and I design curriculum. And
Hmm.
but yeah, I think I'm more of a guy, to be honest.
Sure.
I think and I don't mean to disparage anybody, but I think I just think everybody is on board and going along, and I forget to listen to the under pieces of everything that's going on. I
Mhm.
just think everybody's there to do the same thing and they're getting it. And so I need to be more empathetic.
My mom was also more of a guy. She was one of six. And so her parents had five girls and a boy, but the boy came way after her. So she was basically like the boy for the family because it was a very traditional family and they wanted a boy. So she was it. And she really struggles with this. And it's been actually fun over the last couple of years. She's allowed me to do some coaching with her and practice this with her. And she's like, oh my God, there's, and so for her, just these little reflections, just these small little things in conversation completely change the tone of it. And she's found herself feeling actually less frustrated in those social interactions that she has with various people in philanthropic organizations that she's involved with. My dad, you
I
know,
actually had to marry someone who had a really thick skin.
mm,
So, and then I get mad at him because he has a really thick skin. But in seriously, in teaching, I've had to really work on I think somebody said humility, but giving grace. I
Mhm.
listened to a discussion on that, a presentation on that, and I found that really powerful. And I think that comes into it, but it's still a struggle. I mean,
Yeah.
you come from where you've been for, I won't say how many years, but that's really hard to change,
Mhm.
you know.
Yes. And so in our professional climate, being a subject matter expert is highly valued. That's like the reverse of good listening. And so being a subject matter expert and then being able to take that hat off and put on that sort of coaching, helping hat, those are just two really different things. Both super valuable. One of them is the obvious, easy thing that's credentialed and proven. The other thing, there's almost nothing for that. Like I never got any training in how to listen ever. I was 50 before I encountered any of this.
Mm.
And yet I thought I was a good listener and pretty mixed.
Yeah, and I got to say, Simon, it's fascinating, between this reflective listening and what it creates, as a continuation of, let's say, the parroting technique that we've both trained in, right? Where it's
Mhm.
not just giving back to you what you said in a completely new way, so that we can be aligned on what it is you're thinking, right, and clarifying the communication. But it's really that, okay, now taking that next step and almost providing that opportunity for the speaker to keep pulling themselves into a greater comfort zone for
Mhm.
change to happen,
Yep.
which is it's
Yep.
does seem like a really powerful technique.
Well, and I had this interesting thing happen with a leader who was a man and had this surprise moment where we were doing this, and then suddenly he had to put the brakes on. He was like, I don't know what I think. And I was like, oh shit, I'm a man leader and I don't know what I think. That was like a crisis of who I am to himself. So actually, the reflective listening got him to a point of extreme uncomfort because of what suddenly came up in front of him.
It comes back to it might have been you, Heather, talked about vulnerability, showing up with appropriate, non-manipulative, non-toxic vulnerability is so difficult for leaders by hierarchical position,
Hmm.
and particularly a certain generation of males. I think of my dad, right? Who's in his 90s and grew up in a point where he was he's the primary wage earner. He was the fixer of things. And so fast forward to today's uh, institutional corporate educational world, how safe is it for somebody to be vulnerable?
Right. And confident. Yep.
It's a necessary condition for psychological safety, right? All the Google Aristotle showed that. Great, on a small team where you trust individuals, you can build it, you can show up and say, shit, I don't know what I'm thinking. But as you raise the stakes in this world, it gets really difficult, if not downright terrifying for some people to go, I don't know.
Hmm.
I don't know what I think. I don't know what I'm going to do.
Yep.
I feel powerless.
And for the coach to make that safe and say, cool, let's go find out, to not shame that person, to not one down and be like, yep, 100%. And that's where the iceberg metaphor, I've used that more and more and be like, we're all icebergs. Ideally, we don't like to get pushed around. We move and we change slowly. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that we know that's surfaced, and there's a bunch that we don't know, and that's just fine. The work of being a real pro is saying, I'm going to do the work of digging in there, having those conversations, surface the iceberg, because that's where the complexity of the problems we face in business can actually be influenced. And everyone says they want to do that.
And that is, and you've heard me say it, Simon, for years, that is, I think, the crux of the issue is that the model that we were living into up until now was based on no, we need one expert at the top, everybody else just needs to do what they're told. Right now we live in a complex world where you can't be an expert because you're solving a problem that's never happened before. Where's there an expert in that? Right? Show me every expert that's gotten human beings to Mars. We'll get them jobs at NASA. We'll have human beings in Mars in no time, right? Oh, wait, that's never been done before, right? And that takes a different type of thinking. And it's to your point, it's an exploration, right? And it's a exploration journey, one that happens over time. And the key to being willing to do that is a willingness to be uncomfortable, because you're going to learn things that are going to completely contradict what you thought you knew, that are going to be in complete opposition to what, how things work, at least in your opinion. And it's not easy to change. Don.
Yeah, Simon, my mind goes to what happens if this kind of dynamic is introduced to a board of trustees as a very helpful alternative to my job as a board member is to offer advice to the head of the school. I had a trustee, a fellow named Ted Etherington, as a member of my board when I was heading Hammonasset School. Ted had been the president of Wesleyan. He also then became the president of the American Stock Exchange. So here's a fellow who had every right to have a huge ego and to display that ego at all points. But instead, he asked the best questions in private conversations with me and also in the board meeting to model great trustee behavior. And I'm just thinking, if I had trained my board in reflective listening, it would have saved a fair amount of heartburn for me, and had some more collaborative spirit among my board. And I think boards have only gotten more meddlesome with COVID, not less meddlesome. So this would be a route to more active listening from board and collaborative problem solving.
Yep. And so Todd Covert and I last week presented at the Independent School Chairpersons Association on some of the stuff that we're doing with Learning Flow and LEAF in sort of adaptive leadership stuff. This is what I'll propose to Bethany for next summer, to be like, hey, can I come back and add the counterpoint to this, which is, you got the technical stuff, the structures, the agile mindset, all that sort of stuff. And here's how at the very ground level, you practice the things that make the Kanban board and make those tools and the mindset really stick.
All right.
Not only that, but you unlock the capability of the people in the system to move on without you. Part of the problem with the old consulting model, Don, the opposite of what you talked about. I'm the expert, I have the answers, is the expert never has all the context. They have the answers. They take the opportunity for accountability with learning away from other people. I did what he said. It didn't work. I didn't learn a damn thing. So here's to knowing when to consult, but deferring or over-indexing on coaching to unlock the knowledge that's there below the waterline. That people, they're the penguins on the top of the iceberg. They're afraid to go in the water because there are apex predators down there, right? They're killer whales. I can't see them. I better stay up here where I'm safe. You teach them that they can swim, okay, and they don't get eaten.
All right, excellent. Simon, any last thoughts before we wrap up today's session?
Be brave.
Be brave. All right, excellent. Well, thank you all very much for joining us today. We invite you to join us on the third Friday of every month. We're going to have different speakers, different topics. All the sessions are recorded. We'll make them available. Bring a friend, bring two friends. Bring your challenges, bring your thoughts, and we look
bring your
forward
boss
to seeing, and bring your boss. Yes. And we look forward to seeing you in our next session.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thanks so much.